All right, well, we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. My name is Nathan Silverstein. I'm the founder and president of the Polish Club at the University of Texas at Austin. This event is being recorded and will be posted on the Polish Club's website, where we have a virtual library of recordings of all our past guest speakers. I am required by UT to read the following disclaimer. Today's event is being hosted by the Polish Club at UT, a registered student organization. This is not an event sponsored by the University of Texas at Austin. The views expressed today are of the student organization / invited guest speaker and do not represent the views of the university or its officers. I would also like to thank our co-sponsors, UT's Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies, the Center for European Studies, Liberal Arts Honors, Texas Global, and the Department of Government. We thank you all for your support. With that said, I'm excited to introduce today's speaker, President Aleksander Kwaśniewski. President Kwaśniewski is from Białogard, Poland. He studied transport economics and foreign trade at the University of Gdańsk. In 1989, the president participated in the historic roundtable agreements that helped bring an end to communist rule in Poland. In 1990, President Kwaśniewski helped found the Social Democratic Party and served as its first chairman until he was elected president. He was also one of the founding members of the Democratic Left Alliance in 1991. In 1995, President Kwaśniewski was elected president of Poland. President Kwaśniewski's greatest achievements from his first term were the creation of a new Polish constitution in 1997, which did away with the modified Stalinist constitution the country had been operating under, signing a treaty of friendship with Lithuania in 1997, and helping Poland become a member of NATO in 1999. In 2000, President Kwaśniewski was re-elected president in a decisive first-round victory, becoming the first president of Poland to serve 2 terms. President Kwaśniewski's greatest achievements during his second term were helping Poland become a member of the European Union in 2004 and mediating the Orange Revolution, which was a series of protests in Ukraine from 2004 to 2005 over corruption and election fraud. The president was one of the people most responsible for the peaceful resolution to the revolution. Throughout his presidency, President Kwaśniewski enjoyed widespread support, with his approval rating having reached as high as 80%. In 2006, President Kwaśniewski became a distinguished scholar in the practice of global leadership at Georgetown University. In 2008, the president became the chairman of the European Council on Tolerance and Reconciliation. Today, President Kwaśniewski will be delivering a speech entitled Russia's War on Ukraine. The president will speak for around 45 minutes. He will then take Q&A for around 15 minutes. All registrants had the ability to submit their questions for President Kwaśniewski on the registration page. I have selected the 5 or so most interesting questions and will be asking them anonymously. It is my great honor to now welcome a great Polish leader, President Aleksander Kwaśniewski.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, and I welcome all of you, and I'm very thankful for the invitation by Polish Club at University of Texas at Austin. I hope I will try to make my introduction a little bit shorter to give you more space for questions and answers, because I think that is a better form of conversation even through Zoom. Well, we have a very dramatic time in the history of the world. Frankly speaking, very few expected that Russia will decide to attack Ukraine with full scale, with such tough methods, including attack against civil places and civilians, etc. But to understand the war, to understand the conflict, is necessary to make some historical remarks. And please allow me to start with historical background of this conflict between Russia and at Ukraine. And it's necessary to say, because that is absolutely sure that is Russian aggression against Ukraine. That is absolutely unprovoked war. Because when I will speak about historical elements, probably you can have such thinking or such imagination that maybe the Ukraine is also to some extent guilty in this story. So my first point, very strong point, is no. This war is Russian aggression against Ukraine, and absolutely unprovoked and unacceptable. But speaking about historical background, it's necessary to say, because you are very far away from, you are Polish club, so that you are not far away, because you have Polish roots and you understand much more history as normal Americans, or typical Americans, better to say. But this history between Russia and Ukraine is quite complicated. Because if you want to see the beginning of Russian state, it's necessary to go to Kiev. And Kiev is a place which is a cradle of Russian statehood, of Russian history, so-called Ruś Kijowska, Kiev's Rus. And that's one of the reasons why for Russians, the Kiev still is much more connected for them with Russian history as with Ukrainian history. And then, of course, for many, many years, because this Kiev's Rus, that is the history of 11th, 12th century, so 1,000 years ago, more or less. And then we have a great Russian Empire. And in this great Russian Empire, Ukraine was very important part of this empire, in different ideological forms of the Russian Empire, because we had the Tsarist Empire, we have Soviet Union, etc. But in each form of Russian Empire, Ukraine was extremely important part of this great Russia, of this empire of Russia. And of course, that is why Russians, they don't understand all these problems of Ukrainian independence, because these ideas of independent Ukraine, they were cancelled by Russians in the last 500 against Cossacks, many wars against the Ukrainian independent movement. It was absolutely idea to keep this imperialistic Russia together, and for this imperialistic vision of Russia, Ukraine was absolutely necessary element. The last such attempt to be independent, it was the beginning of 20th century after First World War, when Simon Petlura tried to use this international very complicated situation and collapse of Tsarist Russia and Soviet Union to create independent Russia. But after 1 year and some months, this project and this idea didn't success. And the first time when we can speak about independent sovereign Ukraine is the time after collapse of Soviet Union. But what is interesting, that before the collapse of Soviet Union, Ukraine, because the end of Soviet Union is end of 91, but some months before, Ukraine organized referendum about own Ukrainian sovereignty, independence. And in this referendum, against the expectations, especially expectations of Moscow, the participation extremely high. It was something around 90% who voted. And the result was absolutely unexpected as well, because almost 90% of Ukrainians said in this absolutely free referendum that they want to be independent. And the date of independence, the decision of independence of Ukraine is coming even before end of Gorbachev and end of Soviet Union. And that is very important, because it means that this wish, this idea of liberty, of sovereignty, of independence was for centuries very strong among Ukrainians. It was limited very much. It was devastated by Russians, also by Poles. It's necessary to say as well, in many centuries, we were some part of this discussion or this fight of Ukraine. But finally, in 91, we have independent Ukraine. And this fact is accepted by ruling forces and leaders of Russian Federation those time. Before Putin, Yeltsin was a leader of Russia, and I want to end this historical remarks to remind that in the year 94, when Ukraine decided to resign of nuclear weapon in Budapest, it was very important meeting of the permanent members of Security Council of United Nations. China, Russia, France, Great Britain, and USA, of course. And these countries signed so-called Budapest Memorandum. What was the main idea of this memorandum was that Ukraine, these countries, including Russia, accept independence of Ukraine, and they are offering full guarantees for territorial integrity of Ukraine and security of this country, especially because Ukraine decided to resign of this quite big amount of nuclear weapon, which was on the Ukrainian soil. So it means that until 2015, it was also in the Russian Federation full understanding and acceptance for independence and sovereignty of Ukraine in the borders which were accepted in at least in Budapest, 94. It means together with Crimea, together with Lugansk and Donetsk. And that is what we had before Putin. Now we have a Putin. And Putin was elected as a president 2000. You have to know that 2000 I was elected also for second term, what not reminded. And I had many opportunities to meet Putin in the period 2000-2005. And I tell you, I remember such long conversation in Kremlin, in private apartments of Putin. It was 2002, when he told me, and he was still very young president because he was only second year in the office, and he told me that he has two main goals. And the first goal is to rebuild the position of Russia on the international stage, political, diplomatic stage. And really, it happened. And second, it was to rebuild or to reconstruct Great Russia. And it was very, very dangerous idea. Why? Because to rebuild Great Russia means to have Ukraine under control, to have a Ukraine and Belarus and also some part of others, but today we speak about Ukraine. The idea is to have the Ukraine at least in the zone of Russian influence and probably under full control. And of course, the explanation of Putin when we discussed this issue 2002 was exactly the same what he repeated many times after that. And even in his famous essay 2021, when he said two main explanations why Ukraine should be part of Great Russia, it means under Russian control. First, because Ukrainians are not the nation. They have no own culture, etc. And secondly, that Ukraine is not a state. They have no tradition of the state, etc., etc. And I think these two elements are the main driving arguments for Putin to do all these stupid things. But also these two ideas that Ukraine is not a state and Ukrainians are not the nation is a source of the main Putin's mistakes, failures. But when I spoke with Putin in 2002, I repeat, he was a young president, my feeling was, okay, that is a dream of new president. Of course, quite legitimate dream to be again strong player in international politics and a little bit dangerous thing to rebuild Great Russia. But then I was very much involved in this Maidan conflict, Maidan crisis 2004-2005, what was mentioned. And after this, I tell you, my conversation, my meetings with Putin were extremely complicated, because I was supporting Ukraine, and Putin was very angry with that, was very unsatisfied. And I remember two conversations in the year 2005, very, very tough, very difficult. But what I realized, that after Maidan, Putin is about Ukraine, not in sense of a dream, but in sense of political plan. Why? Because he was extremely afraid that such situation like in Kiev with Maidan can happen in Moscow as well. And that is one of the main fears of Putin, that the streets, because he doesn't like his democracy, and especially he hates democracy which is demonstrated on the streets in such spontaneous actions, in such spontaneous actual demonstration, etc. So since 2004-5, I think, to take Ukraine under own Russian control was his plan. And since 2014, when he used this crisis with Yanukovych and this dignity Maidan to for annexation of Crimea and to support separatists in Donetsk and Lugansk. So in my opinion, since 2014, Ukraine in Putin's thinking, Putin's political plans is obsession. And this is a problem, because if you are obsessed, you have a problem to understand the reality, to understand the arguments. And I think that is what we can see now with Putin and Ukraine. And now we have a war. Since 24th of February 22, we have a war, and it's necessary to say that only one country which expected this war, of course, I don't speak about Russia, was United States. Were United States, because from Washington we had a lot of information that the Russians are going to prepare this war, to do this war, etc., etc. And I have to say that all informations of American intelligence and American administration were correct. But I tell you, we in Europe, and even myself, I know Putin, I know Ukraine quite well. I thought still that he will not cross this red line. Why? Because I thought that Putin, formed by KGB, the man who is 22 years in the office, is a very experienced person. He will understand that this war is a mistake, because he can achieve the same results, for example, to control Ukraine, not using such tough methods as a full. Unfortunately, I was mistaken. Many people in the world were mistaken, because Putin lost his pragmatism. He's much more obsessed out of the reality as a pragmatic politician as he was before. Putin thought that this war against, because of his understanding of Ukraine, wrong understanding, it will be blitzkrieg. It will be war for 7 days. He thought that the Russian troops will be in Kiev after 3-4 days. He will eliminate or kill Zelensky, and he will nominate some who, among pro-Russian Ukrainian politicians, to be new leader of this country. And then, of course, with support of Russian forces, armies, police, etc., they will try to control this country for forever. But it didn't happen. Why? Because this idea to make such blitzkrieg was wrong, was absolutely out of the reality from the very beginning. Ukrainians are the nation. Ukraine is a state. Even during the wartime, this state works. State is quite well organized. Putin underestimates the army, Ukrainian army, because the morale of the army is very high. They are quite experienced. They have experiences of 8 years of such fights with Russians after annexation of Crimea, etc. They have a good and very patriotic officers and generals, a new generation of these generals, which who understand very well new methods of the war, new weapons, etc. Putin underestimated very much young generation of Ukrainians, because independent Ukraine exists since 91. So it means 31. So all the people, 31, they were born in independent Ukraine. They are not Homo Sovieticos. They are not Soviet people, or very much influenced by Russia. Next, Putin underestimated very much President Zelensky, because his opinion about Zelensky from the very beginning was, well, the man who is a comedian, who is an actor, he cannot be serious politician, etc. And of course, Zelensky had a lot of problems to govern, because he had some lack of experience, what was quite obvious. But during the war, Zelensky is showing the best talents, the best skills. And he decided to give all these war actions for the generals. And today, Zelensky is a leader who is, first of all, responsible for the communication with own citizens and with the world. And this job he's doing absolutely fantastic, because that is his profession. In his life, communication, good speeches, good statements. It was something what was his profession from the very, very beginning. And Zelensky really today is a strong leader of Ukraine, is very respected person in the world. And I think he's one of the most important element of this fight. And next, what was a big mistake of Zelensky, of Putin, was that he underestimated the reaction of the West. Because I know from many statements of Putin, of Lavrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs, that these guys, they don't believe that the West can be united. And such structures like European Union or NATO, they are weak. They are also very, very slow, sometimes demoralized, etc. And today we have to say that the West is very much united. Probably is more united as 10 years ago or 20 years ago. NATO is united with all these supplies of military equipment for Ukraine and organized exercises for Ukrainian soldiers. European Union is very much united to support financially, economically, politically, and in humanitarian actions Ukraine. So that is the next mistake of Putin. And probably the most spectacular sign of this historical mistakes of Putin is that finally two neutral countries, Sweden and Finland, decided to ask for NATO full membership. Which was an explanation of this action against Ukraine from Moscow, was that Moscow cannot accept that the NATO countries are coming closer and closer to Russia. And therefore, Russia wants to react on this idea of Ukraine to be a member of NATO. But today, we have neighbors of Russia asking for NATO membership, Finland and Sweden. That's a historical thing, and that is that, in my opinion, it shows the scale of defeat of Putin in his strategic thinking, in his understanding of the world. So we have now more than 240 days of the war, and of course the main question, which is very natural, very obvious, is what next? What is the future of this conflict? And I want to say so. This war is long-lasting war, so we should be prepared for a long time of such attacks, counterattacks, etc. I don't see the space today for some ceasefire or peace negotiations. Why? Because Russia is not ready to accept that they should go back to the borders at least before 24th of February, and maybe for this guaranteed borders of Ukraine since 91. And Ukrainians, they are not ready to make some compromises. They are not ready to resign of own territory. And therefore, for example, the statement of Elon Musk was so much criticized in Ukraine, because it was the idea for the peace, let's Ukrainians give up. You know, that today we cannot expect such a position, because you can see, etc. So the war is for many months probably more complex than Ukraine and Russia in sense of the relations. That is such a wall, or such let's say hatred which will for generations, and that's the problem. And finally, saying what I said, you know, that's war is for months and years, conflict is for generations. What is the future of all of us? And I think it's very dramatic, it's very complicated. Why? Because first of all, for Russia, of course, this war will be more and more costly and dramatic, because of the sanctions, because of limits in military equipment, demoralization of the army, lack of understanding why they should go fight with Ukrainians. So I think for Russia, and especially for Putin, that is a very bad scenario, and I think that Putin will collapse, or something will happen with Putin in coming months. For the world, this situation is also not good, because especially for Europe, because we have energy crisis, we have high inflation because of highest prices of the energy. Probably we will have a quite deep recession in coming months, and of course the standard of living, standard of everything will decrease, and that is not nice, especially in many countries which they have elections in front of them, and I think that is a time again for the populists, for such people with simple ideas, etc., etc. But of course, mainly that's a dramatic situation for Ukraine, because Ukraine still is in time of war. They have rocket attacks against civilians, against the cities. In Ukraine today, we have 12 million people displaced. 6 million are outside, are abroad. The structure of these refugees groups is very special, because mainly they are women with. So the situation is very dramatic. During the war, it's very difficult to think about some investments, about normal life. And that is Ukraine in this situation really is in very, very complicated place, and of course they need supplies of the weapon, because without that they cannot continue the war against Russia. But they need money, they need humanitarian support, and all the things. Millions of Ukrainians are abroad. In Poland today we have something around 2 million Ukrainians, what I said before, women and children. We organize full support for these ladies. We open schools and kindergartens for youngsters. This year, 1st of September, that's the beginning of school year in Poland, we have 500,000 young Ukrainians in Polish schools. Of course, it was not easy to organize, but we did it, etc. So finally, I want to say, so this situation is dramatic, it's complicated, but we can win. That is not so that in this fight against Russian imperialism, Russian authoritarian system, Russian aggression, Russian war crime, we have no chances. No, I think we have a lot of chances. But the precondition of our success is our unity and solidarity. And I think everything what United States are doing is really fantastic, is great. Yeah, I think the support for Ukraine decided by American administration, President Biden, but also by the citizens, by the people of America. That is great, and we need such continuous support in the future. But we have, especially in Europe, we have some difficult test in front of us. That is the winter, because I understand this winter can be quite cold, quite unpleasant because of the problems with energy prices, with deliveries of energy, etc. But in any case, we have to continue this solidarity and unity, because if not, Putin will win, and the victory of Putin means the end, frankly speaking, of this democratic world, where we accept rights, when we accept individuals, when we accept liberty, when we accept sovereignty of the states, etc. So this conflict is not the conflict somewhere on the margin of the world. This conflict is in the heart of democratic world, and that is our task to do everything what is possible to win this fight for democracy, for freedom, for human rights, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Very enlightening speech. I think it's especially important that everybody understand the extensive history behind the issue, which you did such a great job of explaining to us. So now we're going to turn over to questions from the audience. So as I said in my introductory speech, the audience had the ability to submit questions when they registered, and I picked ones that I thought were most interesting and relevant. I think one we can start with, because you touched on this in your speech, is do you think it was a mistake for Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons? And if yes, do you think Russia would have invaded if Ukraine still had its nuclear weapons?
I tell you, it's a very important question and very difficult answer, because, of course, in my opinion, if Ukraine would have a steel nuclear weapon, such aggression would be not possible. But when Ukraine decided to resign nuclear weapon, it was a totally different period of the history in the world, because we were absolutely optimistic that the world can be without nuclear weapon at all. And even China, even of course United States, but even Yeltsin's Russia, they were ready to accept to sign a lot of documents to reduce this arsenal of nuclear weapon, to accept a lot of limitations, a lot of conventions concerning that. So we didn't, and of course you can say that we probably were too naive, even me, when we thought that the world can be developing in a very peaceful way. But it was so. Unfortunately, the world now is much worse as it was on the end of 20th century. But the simple answer to you, if Ukraine would be stronger having nuclear weapon or not, the answer is, of course, yes. They would be much stronger having this nuclear weapon.
While we're on the topic of nuclear weapons, I wanted to ask what you think about the idea of Poland hosting US nuclear weapons on its territory.
I don't hear you.
Can you hear me, Mr. President?
I don't hear you.
Can you hear me, Mr. President?
No, last seconds I didn't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now, though?
Now I hear you.
Okay, excellent. So I said, while we're on the topic of nuclear weapons, what do you think about the idea of Poland hosting US nuclear weapons on its territory?
Well, I tell you, of course, the situation is very dynamic and it's necessary to see what will happen. In my opinion, still, the situation that Poland is a member of NATO, what was one of my main achievements during my presidency, 99, that is the best guarantee of our security. If the situation will be so complicated or worsening that NATO will decide to have some units with nuclear weapon closer to Russian border, of course, it will be necessary to do. But today, I think still is not necessary for Poland to have a nuclear weapon now. For us, it's very important to have American units in Poland, to have a very good air control system in Poland. And I think what was decided by NATO last month and by Biden as well, the strengthening of so-called eastern flank of NATO, that is a must, because the real aggressor is coming from the east. Today, it's not necessary to have a so strong units or equipments in Spain, Portugal, or somewhere. But in eastern flank means Poland, Romania, and Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. That is something what can be decisive for the future of NATO and for our security.
While we're on the you mentioned NATO, so to pivot towards NATO a bit, what do you think are the chances that Ukraine's NATO membership application will be accepted?
Well, I'm very much in favor of that. I would like to see Ukraine as a full member of NATO, but being political realist, I can say so. Very much depends how this war will be finished. If Ukraine will win, what is not easy, and that is not decided, then of course this NATO membership, because victory of Ukraine means the huge defeat of Russia. And such weak Russia cannot oppose Ukrainian membership in NATO. So, but that is, well, nice scenario, but frankly speaking, not very much realistic. So I think that much more realistic scenario is that we'll have some kind of peace deal with Russia. And I think I can imagine, for example, that Russia will decide, okay, all these regions, Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, etc., are Ukrainian. About Crimea, we'll discuss on diplomatic way next, nobody knows how many years. But the condition to accept this return of Ukraine on the 100% of own territory is that Ukraine will be not a member of NATO. And I can imagine such negotiations. And then, of course, I can imagine also many countries in NATO that will say, okay, that is a good deal, we have to accept it. But in any case, will be necessary to propose some real guarantees of the security for Ukraine, and that is complicated because Ukraine had such guarantees. I mentioned the Budapest Memorandum, 94. And even having such guarantees, the war started. So if you ask me if I can imagine, yeah, I can imagine Ukraine NATO. Whether I like it, yes, I like it very much. But realistically speaking, I can imagine also that after such, let's say, political victory of Ukraine, we'll have some kind of peace deal, which will give Ukraine some kind of guarantees, but not necessarily membership of NATO.
If, to continue on the topic of NATO just a little bit and get a little more into the details of if they were accepted, would that trigger Article 5, or do you think it wouldn't, because the war has already taken place and it started before Ukraine would have become a member?
No, I tell you, the Article 5 is absolutely crucial for NATO, and in my opinion, that's still the very, very important argument. Huh? Sorry?
No, I didn't say anything.
No, because Article 5 for NATO members is absolutely crucial one. And if, for example, Putin will decide to attack Poland or Baltic states, I'm sure that NATO will respond. Of course, it means Third World War. It means a very dramatic situation, but what is also important to know, Putin and Russian army, especially after everything what we have seen in Ukraine, they have no chances to win against NATO. That is necessary, and I think Putin knows it very, very well. He has no chances to win against NATO. So I think the Article 5 is absolutely, that is in the center of everything. With Article 5, NATO would be a very weak structure, and with Article 5, NATO is absolutely strong structure with a lot of possibilities and instruments.
Transferring over to the topic of peace, do you think President Zelensky should have been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, given that he is fighting for world peace and freedom? Why or why not?
Not this year, I tell you, because I think it was a problem for Nobel Prize Committee to give a prize for a man who is a leader of the world today. Yeah, of course, not his war. It was the Russian aggression against Ukraine. But I think if Zelensky will find some positive solutions, firstly militarily, and he will have a success against Russia, and then he will accept some kind of agreement, then of course he will deserve for Nobel Prize fully, and I have no doubts that is possible scenario that he will have this Nobel Prize. But this year it would be a mistake. In my opinion, decision of Nobel Prize Committee was absolutely correct, because this year they decided to support non-governmental organizations in 3 countries fighting against authoritarian regimes and in fact against Russia, in Belarus, in Memorial in Russia, and this group in Ukraine. So in my opinion, it was absolutely right decision, and it is my wish and my dream that next year, after successes on the military field and after success of some negotiations, Zelensky will be the next Nobel Prize winner for peace, really for peace.
Let's see here. If you mentioned that President Zelensky may be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in the future if Ukraine prevails in the war. So continuing down that, hypothetical situation, if Russia loses the war, do you think Russia will break up into smaller countries given the large number of different ethnic groups within Russia?
I don't hear you again. Please repeat the last sentence because I don't hear it.
I
Hello?
asked if Russia loses the war, do you think Russia will break up into smaller countries given the large number of?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. Of course, the success of Ukraine means the end of Putin and his political system called Putinism. I think it will be a lot of tensions, quite serious in the regions, also probably organized by younger generation, etc. But I think still Russia, after collapse of Soviet Union, frankly speaking, the main parts of this empire left. And if it's easy to imagine that, for example, Ukraine is independent, or Georgia is independent, or Kazakhstan is independent, but to imagine that Tatarstan will be independent, or Chechnya probably can be independent much more as others, but in my opinion, such I can imagine the time of a lot of tensions, but not collapse of Russian Federation. But of course, collapse of Putin, no doubts, because lack of the success in this aggression against Ukraine means the end of Putin's era. And of course, we don't know who will be the successor of Putin, because probably will be the person not very far away from Putin's thinking. But in any case, new person in Kremlin has a chance to do something, because this new person, new leader, will be not responsible for the war. So he can say in the first statement, okay, let's go to make some peace negotiations, because I know I didn't decide about the war. That is not my war. But still, we have a Putin, and that's, it would be fantastic to see his collapse sooner and not later. But I'm afraid that we will see this change in a little bit later as we would like to see it.
In a similar vein, we're talking about Russia and potential regime change and the Russian mentality in general. In your opinion, do you think the Russian people have a desire for democracy?
That is a very good question, I tell you. That is probably fundamental question. I tell you why, because I was asked many times, that is Putin's war or is Russian war? And I tell you, of course, this is Putin's war because he decided about it, etc. But that is very much Russian war as well, because Putin has not such support as public opinion polls are showing, 80%, something like that. It's not true. But he has a support of majority of Russians. And I think this imperialistic thinking, this imperialistic DNA is very much in blood of many, many Russians. And ready to exercise a lot for this idea of great Russia, of greatness, of empire, etc., etc. That is a real problem. I tell you, such war as Putin organized in Ukraine is not new one or not very unique, because that is a fight to enlarge the zone of influence, to keep this country in own zone of influence. Frankly speaking, the Vietnam War of United States were also very, very similar war. But why America finished this war in the United States? was huge. People, the articles of the journalists speaking the crime in Vietnam, movies, etc. Look what is going in Russia. We have no one movie, we have no one article, we have very few demonstrations. It means that is a problem with Russians, with Russia. And your question, if Russia can be one day democratic country, well, by nature, I'm optimistic and I would like to see Russia as a democratic country, but I think today it is a very few arguments to see in visible time Russia and Russians as a democratic society and a democratic country. Unfortunately, I'm not happy with that, but I think it's necessary to see that they are the long way in front of them if they will decide to go this way, because that is absolutely not decided.
I think we have time for one final question. So I think it'll be a bit more Poland specific. Is Poland expecting another wave of Ukrainian refugees this winter? And if yes, roughly how many? And can Poland sustain such an influx?
No, we will sustain, no doubts. We are prepared for that. We have now a lot of experiences. And the most important is what is great and unbelievable. The mood, the sympathy to Ukrainians is really fantastic. And it was not so obvious because, you know, the history between Poland and Ukraine, especially in 20th century, was quite complicated, etc. Today, it works. So I think it is not a problem for us how we'll accept next wave of refugees. We'll organize everything. And that is common effort. It's effort of the people, of the government, of the local governments, and really it looks good. You know, in Poland we don't have such camps for refugees. These people are living with us in our houses, families. They rent the flats. It looks really good. The problem with refugees, this is a problem for Ukraine, because I told you 12 million people are displaced. 500,000 women with children are abroad. And if we will not offer them possibility for return to, it means for Ukraine in longer term demographic catastrophe. Because can you imagine that many years these husbands and women and kids are totally separate, they have no contacts. It means a lot of easy to imagine consequences. So I think that is one of the reasons why I'm very active. I'm doing a lot of things for such small projects of reconstruction in some places in Ukraine which are safer, where it's necessary only to rebuild one school, one hospital, some buildings, etc. Because having private-public partnership is possible to build, to introduce such projects soon, and then to offer for these refugees return. Because for the future of Ukraine, these refugees, these people are absolutely necessary. But about Poland, don't worry. We will do our job as well as possible, because our hearts are open for Ukrainians. And it looks very nice. I tell you, when in Warsaw today, Warsaw is a city with more or less 2 million people. We have at least 200,000, maybe more Ukrainians. A lot of Ukrainian cars, Ukrainian language on the street, and it looks very normal. You know, no problem with that.
Well, we're at time and we want to be respectful of your time, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I don't know. Technically, you did you understand me or not?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
No, the techniques was okay. You know, did you hear me, or everything was fine?
Yeah, everything was great. We heard you loud.
Connection was good.
Everything was great. We heard you loud and clear. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for an extremely educational and eye-opening conversation. Everyone, on behalf of everyone, I'm sure everyone who attended this meeting is, very grateful for your time. Everyone who's
Thank you.
on the
My pleasure.
meeting, yeah, I'm not sure if everybody who's on the meeting understands, but it's now 7 p.m. on a Saturday in Poland. So I think that's a testament to President
Yes.
Kwasniewski's, greatness that he was willing to do this talk at such a time. And we feel very grateful that there's leaders like you out there, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, especially for you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Here.